perspective, there's really kind of a still search for more convenience. We have way more communication options today, and it's just not getting any easier. Privacy and security as well is really at the forefront. With all the cyber attacks and kind of the general fear that's increasing on that. And as well, I think it's also creating a problem around authenticity. Now, we have all these apps, all these different sort of call centers, etc. But do you really still kind of have an authentic relationship between the consumer and also businesses who, on the other hand, I think more and more pressure for speed, time to market is more and more critical, primarily because most businesses, especially those who are not software businesses, are being disrupted, by new entrants whose raison d'être is customer experience. So whether it's if you're in a taxi business, disrupted by Uber. Uber does not have any taxis, but their raison d'être is actually orchestrating those experiences. And on top of this, the businesses have got to deal with and leverage all those different channels that are popping up everywhere. And that's not an easy task. So it's really kind of not getting any easier. And I would say it's very much broken to some extent. Still today, a lot of businesses rely on things like application-to-person messaging, for instance, where you get those kind of very often those kind of notifications completely out of context. Hey, is your balance? You can't really act on it. You can't really reply to it. You can't call back. So you're going to most likely have to call back and restate the whole context. And even actually some of the person-to-person communications in a marketplace context, consumer to consumer, very often as well, it's actually quite difficult to actually even act on it. Even if it's like within the app or using SMS, it's still very much isolated, just because of the sheer challenge you have in making those different communications, work with each other. And actually, the majority of the consumer-originated communications is still having to dial into a call center, and they're like really, pretty much all the context is lost. You're gonna have to restate everything that you said before. And actually, what's compounding all of this is on top of that, consumers are also getting exposed to completely new ways of actually interacting, with brands. So especially three new types. The first one is what I call branded in-app experiences. So here's an example of Amazon Mayday. If you have an Amazon Kindle Fire tablet, you can actually interact with somebody in the call center using video, and it's fully contextual and embedded into the app. So you can actually look at your products, etc. The polar opposite is actually brands riding on social networks like Facebook Messenger. So for instance, what we've done at Nexmo with KLM, and here is just if most consumers are not going to be using your app quite often, and most likely they won't download it, riding on other people's social network is probably the best strategy. And then the third way is what we call invisible apps. So all the Siris and Alexas, etc., which is still yet to be kind of completely worked out how people interact with them. But those three types of metaphors are further compounding the problem on how brands actually even deal with it. And in effect, what's happening now, the number of channels is exploding. And I think still, as a consumer, you still have a single relationship with the brand, at least in your head. That's what you think. But because the brands keep on adding the channels, then you end up having different conversations, always having to restate yourself. And I think what we think at Nexmo we're doing, we're actually, through what we call conversations, creating those threads in the cloud. So enabling our customers with our conversation API to link together all those threads, whether it's SMS, in-app chat, in-app voice, telephony calls, video, etc., all into a single thread and attaching, whether it's text or images or recordings of the calls into a single thread to keep the context. And really what's key here is that, you don't necessarily have to keep everything into one location. It could also be about, integrating those different, data stores together. But what's key is to actually have that thread and making it super easy to access through things like APIs. So whether it's your consumer app, we can restate the context. First, if you start engaging with a brand and when you have the sort of chat pop-up coming up, actually as a consumer that you're going to have to restate everything. If actually that brand could actually re-summarize for you, what you've actually done with them, in your last interaction, let's say on the phone. Already, I think as a consumer, you feel better about it. And I think one of the challenges as well is the fact that, storing this in a cloud everywhere and in a compliant manner as well is quite a big challenge when you deal with a lot of PII data potentially. So the approach we are taking here is a threefold. It's about the context, omnichannel, and a human plus. So customer service experience is really key, and it's sort of if you actually really make one misstep, they tend to remember, obviously. The context is usually made of, a physical context, when you went to a shop or your location. So if I engage with you on the phone and I'm in the street, probably better to actually, use, in-app messaging, not kind of calling, just for the sake of efficient communication. But if you don't let me actually do this, then, it's going to be really kind of difficult for me to engage with you as a brand. And the thing is to avoid here is how to avoid having to establish your identity again, restating your problem, and then having my problem resolved. So the way we define contextual communication is enabling both parties to always have sort of that full awareness of what has been discussed before. So things like, some of the challenges I've discussed, around privacy, around the accuracy as well of how you handle multiple devices. Because, we do end up actually having, especially for complex problems or long-running relationships, you don't always use the same device. And secondly, is also taking advantage of all those different channels. So whether it's sort of SMS, push notifications, all the different bots, using Slack, the chat apps, even things like even LinkedIn actually has gotten using chat now. So you got chat in apps and apps in chat as well. So like WeChat, for instance, is embedding, apps inside the chat app. And obviously people talking to each other, So I'll just zoom up a bit because we're a bit late. Yeah, we already talked about this, how leveraging existing social networks is also quite important because most likely what you have is some of your customers will download your app, and they might be your high-paying customers. That's fine. Build the right kind of experience for that, fully in-app and in native. But a lot of these actually will not. So making the most of Facebook Messenger and WeChat, etc., is probably quite essential. So I skip. Okay, I skip a bit faster. Sorry, in the interest of time. So here, I think the context is that keeping the history, in a thread, in the cloud, in a single place, enabling sort of joining those different channels together, whether it's sort of SMS, voice, chat, and enabling, both parties, the consumers and the business employees, to always see that context and actually modify it, whether it's through the app, through the CRM, etc. And on top of this, so there's a help at hand. So artificial intelligence, the way we see it is that it's really useful for predicting, what's going to happen next, or actually summarizing things. But the challenge is that it's also requiring new skill sets for the business using artificial intelligence. Whether it's do you have the right data? Are you able to train your artificial intelligence systems? Are you evolving? Are you evolving them as you add new channels? How do you test? How do you do QA of these versus maybe humans doing the same job? But also, how do you pick the right service? I mean, today there are quite a few fairly broad generic AI services, but more and more they tend to be more focused. Let's say on doing a translation for the medical industry, and that's going to be an ongoing trend. It's probably going to become harder and harder to select the right kind of service. So actually, what we do at Nexmo is we're fairly agnostic and really making it easy for our customers to use really any AI service in effect and embed these into communication. Because what's really interesting is that you can actually have an AI service as a participant into a conference call. So through a technology that is called WebSocket, here we have an example of a traditional telephony call, and one of the participants is actually here, in this case, could be IBM Watson, who's listening in to the call, and potentially making a summary or doing a translation or even doing simply a transcription. And that's purely done through software. There's no need to actually install anything or have some kind of a complex setup. And you can change the AI service if you wish, for another application. So what we'll do here is we have a demo that is combining a sort of a CRM live chat system with a Facebook Messenger and a person kind of engaging with that through text, but also doing sentiment analysis through an AI service in real time. So we'll just go straight onto this, to the demo.
In this demo, we have created a fictitious Facebook page for a brand called Acme Cell. The page will be powered by a simple chatbot. Now, since I'm already logged into Facebook, I don't have to authenticate with the brand. I can start chatting about my account with the bot right away, assuming that my Facebook profile can be matched against what Acme Cell has for me on their end. So let's get started. As you can see, the bot already knows my name and is suggesting a few options. Let's check my balance. It looks like I have a payment due on the 30th. I have an issue with my phone, so I'm going to request a chat with a live agent to get that sorted out. In this case, the chatbot passes control of the conversation to an in-contact agent with a chat skill. Let's follow the conversation to see where it leads.
So here's going to request a callback. So the question is going to be how are we going to transfer the context across?
As the customer, I can decide when I'm ready for a callback from an agent.
So here is just simply demonstrating how we enable those two channels, to operate seamlessly from one to the other, and then you will see after how you also enrich that communication with sentiment analysis in a subsequent step.
Let me illustrate what's happening behind the scenes before continuing with the call.
Okay. So here, what's actually happening is that Nexmo is sort of combining, the sort of the phone of the agent, on the CRM side, and bridging it with the consumer's phone. And what we'll actually do here is actually the audio here will go to a third party. It's just an AI service that does sentiment analysis. So you will see.
On the left side of the screen, we have the sentiment graph. And on the right side, we can see the keywords populating. Below the two is the actual transcription as I'm speaking. Notice the sentiment graph is neutral, but if I start saying positive things like, "This service is great. My phone works just fine after the update. Thank you for helping me. I'm very happy now. I really appreciate it," the sentiment goes up. On the other hand, if I start saying things like, "This service is very bad. It's terrible service. I'm very upset and disappointed," the sentiment goes down. With this data, a supervisor can decide if a barge-in or coaching of an agent is necessary to remedy low sentiment calls. And agents who maintain high levels of call sentiment can be rewarded.
So here, in effect, we demonstrated, how you can both enable omnichannel, omnichannel, so having multiple channels, in the same conversation over a short period of time, whilst retaining the context, but also augmenting it, through the use of artificial intelligence, here with the sentiment analysis. And it's all done through software. Actually, what's interesting as well is that any developer, like really any web developer, or really could develop this. There's no need for any kind of arcane, knowledge of telecoms or anything like this. It's really accessible for everyone. Which is really the power of APIs. So to sum up, it's really about keeping the context in a single thread, and then combining the different channels together and kind of orchestrating them, but also retaining and enhancing the context through artificial intelligence. So what we'll do now is we'll do the quick panel.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hello. Yeah, it's working. So thank you, Thomas, for this quick presentation and overview. So I will now introduce Elias and Piers also on the stage here, which are telling us a little bit about how they use the service and give us also a bit of background about how this is working. Come on, guys. Whatever.
It's a bit tight. Yeah.
Thomas?
Yeah,
like to stand or is it?
Yeah.
So, best thing is we start with asking Elias, introduce yourself.
Sure. So, hi, my name is Elias. I am one of the founders of Minute Hero. Minute Hero is a tech company based out of Hamburg, Germany. We have developed a virtual assistant that automatically documents meetings, web conferences, and conference calls using specifically IBM Watson, and we are also using some of Nexmo services to build some of the products that we're working on. So a lot of the things that you mentioned rang very true and familiar with me.
Thank you. Piers, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Piers Buckley. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Babelforce. We're a Berlin-based company, and we use Nexmo for various telephony services and the APIs and so on. But what we do for our customers is we enable companies like e-commerce companies, fintech companies, and general technology companies to operate their entire customer services. So we essentially allow them to create these kinds of conversations that are managed with the context always in hand, no matter what kind of channel is used.
Thank you. So here's a question to you. How do you see your customers and the market addressing context across multiple channels?
Well, so I was interested in the presentation because we see our customers, on average, for every employee who's actually doing a customer-facing role, they're doing approximately 1,000 times more per day messaging outbound to those customers. That's across WhatsApp, SMS, notifications occurring in apps, also automated phone calls that should be sometimes connecting to an agent. So you're talking about 1,000 times the number of employees. So for 10 employees for one country, you might be doing 10,000 a day in messaging. And then those consumers are sending things back in. And the question is, what do you do with it? If somebody sends a PDF arrives or an attachment to an email or just the email content itself, how do you actually assign that to somebody automatically? What's to happen with that conversation? And then what do you do afterwards? So it comes in, you can't wait for a person to go and read the PDF and decide, oh, that should go to Jack because Jack dealt with the conversation last, or this PDF is for that purpose. It has to somehow happen automatically because there's no way to deal with this kind of scale and to keep things automated. And I think that's where artificial intelligence plus for very specific purposes, it's not general AI, it's really, really just trained on specific data, where that has to happen, but it must be within what Thomas mentioned. You have to maintain the context. You actually have to be able to decide with very high probability of success that you will send an SMS now, or you will send an email, or you will call the customer, or whatever is necessary.
Okay, thank you. Elias, how do you see AI working in conjunction with contextual communication? What are the opportunities you see?
Well, I mean, exactly what Piers said. I think the big opportunity that we have with the current state of the AI tools that we can use is that we can do many of these things that are very repetitive and relatively standard. Take as an example a customer calling in to change their bank account. It's a very, it's a very standard request, but it takes time and it needs to be done. For these tools, the level of AI that we have today is sufficient to do some of these things. And in our context with meetings, what we are working on is, for example, if a participant is late for a meeting and hasn't joined yet, then we are able, for example, to ask our bot Q, could you please give a call to whomever to remind them that the meeting is starting. These are relatively simple, structured things where we can leverage these kind of services with, as you said, high precision and high probability of success. I think we're still far away from like the general AI that really understands context. I think we're probably, I don't know if we're ever going to get there, but we're probably 10, 15 years out from that.
Piers, what are the challenges of selecting and integrating AI solutions and vendors into omni-channel experience?
Well, I think what we're seeing businesses applying AI is very, very specific, like the examples that we spoke about already. Beyond that, I think it's extremely difficult because the training process that's necessary is very difficult to determine whether it really has been successful, and is often then only determined by running it on live data, which is okay, but it can be run in a pilot or whatever, but it runs at risk. So what we're seeing a lot of success with is really applying classification and pattern recognition. So this thing that just happened means that it's to deal with a payment query from earlier. So it's just deciding that what is being received, what's actually occurring in the real world, fits into that bucket. I think that there's a lot of hype around AI, I think partially if you tone down the hype and look at these specific things, then I think it's really justified, because in every single one of the interactions that our customers do, doing these tens of thousands of interactions a day, almost always there's some part of it that can actually be improved, and in a very reasonable way, with a way to roll it out, with a way to actually verify that it works correctly, which is what's important, I think.
Okay. Elias, based on the lesson you've learned from adding new channels, what advice would you give?
Well, I think for us, we have it relatively simple because we're doing a B2B product. So, you usually only have one business identity. But the key challenge for us, has been often is identity exactly. Because, people might, try the service with one identity, let's say their private identity, just to try it out, and then they start using it, and suddenly you get, for example, meeting invitations from an email address that you don't know. It's a very, very simple thing. But then, how do you interact with that customer? Do you try to match this identity with an identity you already know, running the risk of talking to the wrong person, or how do you interact with that person? They expect that it just works. I just invited the service that I signed up for. They might have forgotten that they signed up with a different email address. So these are, identity is a very tricky thing because there's not that one identity oftentimes. How do you deal with, in a business context, how do you deal with organizational structures? If your assistant invites you for a meeting, how do you recognize that? So that is one of the key challenges. The broader you go, the more it's not different identities, different facets of identity you have.
Okay. So now one of my favorite questions to all of you. I start with Thomas. And as a German, this is you can imagine what will come now. So how do you see issues such as privacy and data protection affecting contextual communication?
Yeah, so a lot of these kind of new use cases, leveraging AI and contextual communication, rely on some data, and it's difficult sometimes to scrub, the PI, the personally identifiable information, in the data, and very often actually you need it for the routing. Yeah, so you need to think about that, how you actually scrub the PI data for you, maybe potentially your wider sort of training, of all your models, etc. And also then there's a location as also the challenge around how you make the integration, all of this really easy, but still be compliant, And I think finding providers that actually enable you to store the data in one place, in a cloud, but still retain the programmatic flexibility. So deciding potentially where and how stuff is stored, depending on maybe the type of customer. So what is the kind of a regulatory regime that customer or the business for that customer is actually under? Then so you can actually decide what to do. Like in Germany, for instance, you probably want all the stuff there to be stored in Germany. Maybe less so for the US, and it's actually more flexibility.
Elias, Prias, any comments from you?
Well, okay. So yeah, I mean, the especially in Germany, this is a tough issue, and there's the issue of personally identifiable information. For us, obviously, there's also the issue of company secrets and these kind of things. And what the approach that we are taking is basically assigning like a meta identity that is not personally identifiable directly, but can be linked to the different facets of identity. That basically is the single identity threat, you might call it, that we can use to track everything and connect all the services and link back to the service that we're providing. Because obviously, we're using US services. Some German companies have issues with that.
I'll just say a quick word on that. Yeah, I think for us dealing with financial services companies, it's usually pretty critical that the data is not stored by us at all, and maybe not even in the cloud at all. So we separate entirely data storage from everything else, which is the only way that we can do business in many ways. So a lot of the time we see the data protection angle as, for a company, about managing risk, and frequently based on industry-specific compliance requirements, that actually means that they need to know how the data is controlled in the end of the day. So I think, and that's becoming harder and harder and more stringent.
Good. So thank you very much for the panel. Thank you very much for the presentation, Thomas, and yeah, have a great day.